Welcome to this explainer. Okay, so if you've spent literally any time in the corporate world, you've almost certainly experienced the universal dread and, let's be honest, the deep frustration of the annual performance review, right? You grind incredibly hard all year, you push the needle on every single metric, and yet when the reviews and bonuses finally roll out, the differences between you and the person who, well, barely scraped by, they seem suspiciously small. You kind of sit there wondering what exactly is going on behind closed doors. Well, today we're going to unpack some absolutely fascinating academic research that uncovers exactly why this happens, and more importantly, how organizations can actually fix it.
So let's dive right into this incredibly relatable workplace mystery. Top performers are constantly left scratching their heads, right? They're wondering why their weaker peers somehow manage to skate by with decent ratings and almost identical bonuses. I mean, is management just blind? Do they not care? Well, the reality is actually a lot more complex, and it all boils down to how we, as human beings, weigh personal costs and benefits when we're on the clock.
Believe it or not, there's an actual academic term for this frustrating phenomenon you've experienced. It's called performance evaluation compression. Researchers Yasmin Bull, Stefan Kramer, and Victor Moss explored this exact concept in their study. Compression happens when managers artificially inflate the ratings of their weaker performers. And the result? The entire performance distribution just gets squished together right toward the middle. It makes everyone look, well, pretty much average on paper, completely ignoring their actual output. But why on earth do managers do this? We actually have to pivot to a little bit of empathy here. Managers aren't these cartoon villains trying to cheat top talent out of recognition. They're just human beings trying to avoid the massive psychological and practical costs of delivering bad news. Think about it for a second. Giving someone a genuinely low rating means you have to sit in a room with them, look them dead in the eye, and tell them they just aren't cutting it. It is psychologically painful, it's incredibly time-consuming, and honestly, it can lead to formal HR appeals and completely ruin day-to-day workplace relationships. And this creates a really fascinating core dilemma. On one hand, you have the firm's goal, accurately differentiate efforts so they can reward and retain top talent. But on the other hand, you have the middle manager's actual, immediate goal, avoid painful, costly confrontations with subordinates, and just preserve those daily working relationships. The manager's personal incentives are completely misaligned with the company's broader objectives. It's a classic clash of interests. And, to make matters even worse for the poor manager, almost everyone suffers from a bit of an ego bias. Psychology research perfectly highlights this, noting that few employees consider themselves to be below average. This means that when a manager tries to give a genuinely low, accurate score, the employee rarely just nods and says, "You know what? You're totally right. I slacked off this year." No way. Instead, they feel personally attacked, which makes the manager's job of giving honest feedback an absolute nightmare. So managers take the easy way out, right? They compress the ratings. But this little shortcut causes severe, hidden damage to the organization. It completely distorts incentives. It massively demotivates your stronger performers, making your absolute best talent far more likely to just pack up and leave for a competitor who will actually recognize their worth. Ultimately, it fosters a culture of mediocrity, where employees just stop investing in building new skills, because why bother if the extra effort isn't rewarded? This is a problem that desperately needs a systemic solution. All right, let's move to Section 1, the control system levers, specifically information accuracy and outcome transparency. So how do we actually fix this mess? Well, we have to look at the systems in place. The researchers hypothesized that organizations can use very specific design choices in their control systems to literally change a manager's behavior. And we're going to focus on two massive levers that companies can pull here. The first is information accuracy. Basically, how reliable and clear the data is. Are we just guessing at an employee's effort, or do we have rock-solid, indisputable metrics? The second lever is outcome transparency. Are bonus amounts and performance ratings a heavily guarded secret, or are they public knowledge within the firm? The researchers really wanted to know if tweaking these two specific variables could finally break that toxic cycle of rating compression. Now, let's think about this logically together before we look at the actual data. Imagine this. What happens if an organization makes everyone's bonuses completely transparent and public, but the actual data used to measure performance is highly volatile and just kind of inaccurate? Will the manager be brave and differentiate the pay, or will they panic? Let's find out in Section 2, the MBA lab test, Store A versus Store B. To test this academic theory in a real dollars and cents scenario, The researchers gathered 124 MBA students for a super fascinating simulation. Here are the ground rules. The participants were asked to act as regional managers of a retail chain. They were forced to divide a maximum bonus pool of $10,000 between two of their subordinates, the managers of Store A and Store B. And here's the kicker. Whatever they didn't allocate was returned to the corporate pool. So they had to make real, hard decisions about value.
I invite you to play the role of the regional manager for just a second. If you look at the performance reports provided to the participants, Store A clearly outperformed Store B in 5 out of 6 key indicators. I mean, they're bringing in $120,500 in sales revenue per square foot compared to Store B's $93,640. Return on sales, customer satisfaction, employee satisfaction, Store A is absolutely dominating. But how much of a bonus difference do they actually deserve for that?
To find out what actually drives fair compensation, the researchers mixed and matched the participants into 4 different experimental conditions. For that information accuracy lever, some were told the stores had highly volatile customer flows, which meant the performance metrics were kind of noisy and inaccurate. Others were told customer flows were steady, making the metrics highly accurate. Then, for the transparency lever, half were told company policy required strict confidentiality on all bonuses. The other half? They were told the exact bonuses allocated would be published to all employees in the firm. Which brings us to Section 3, the results, breaking the compression cycle. So, out of all those scenarios, which combination of these organizational rules finally gave managers the courage to do their jobs properly and stop compressing the bonuses? Well, the data reveals a very clear winning formula. When you look at the results in a 2x2 matrix, you see that pulling just one lever completely fails. If you only increase accuracy, but you keep bonuses a secret, managers still compress ratings to keep the peace. If you only increase transparency, making bonuses public but using flawed data, yep, they still compress the ratings. The only condition that actually resulted in managers heavily differentiating between the rockstar store and the underperforming store was when both high accuracy and high transparency were present. Let's break down the psychology of why this happens, because it makes total sense. If you make bonuses public, but you don't give a manager accurate data, you are basically setting them up for a nightmare. They know for a fact that the weaker employee is going to march right into their office, point at that public bonus sheet, and demand to know why they got less. If the manager can't point to rock-solid data to justify that lower bonus, they'll simply compress the ratings and pay everyone roughly the same just to avoid an argument they can't win. But when you combine high accuracy with high transparency, something amazing happens. The gap between the bonus assigned to the top performer and the weaker performer spiked to a massive $3,262. Just for some context here, in all the other conditions, managers squished that gap way down to somewhere between $2,100 and $2,400. You can actually see this beautifully illustrated in the data. Notice how the line representing high transparency just shoots straight upward, but only when it meets the high information accuracy condition. It proves that only the combination of excellent data and total openness gives managers the leverage and, frankly, the pressure needed to truly reward top talent. So this winning formula relies on what we can call a dual mechanism. It's a shield and a spotlight. High accuracy acts as a shield. It gives the manager hard, objective facts to point to, which makes confronting a defensive, weak employee much less painful. High transparency acts as a spotlight. Because everyone can see the outcomes, the manager knows the top performer will be furious, and rightly so, if their superior effort isn't visibly recognized. Together, these two factors fundamentally shift the manager's personal cost-benefit ratio away from that easy compression and toward fair differentiation. All right, let's wrap this up with Section 4, the takeaway: system design matters. So what does all this academic research mean for business leaders, HR folks, and everyday employees sitting in the real world today? It means we have to stop simply blaming middle managers for taking the path of least resistance. It's just human nature. If you want to retain your absolute best people, you have to design control systems that make it easier for managers to actually do the right thing. You must invest the money to build high-quality, accurate performance metrics, and at the same time, you have to cultivate a firm-wide culture of openness and transparency. You really can't have one without the other. I want to leave you with a thought to evaluate your own workplace. Think back to your last performance cycle. Are your company's performance reviews truly built on transparent and accurate systems that reward top effort? Or are your systems just secretly encouraging managers to compress the numbers to keep the peace? It's a critical question, and how an organization answers it might just determine whether their top talent stays or walks right out the door. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. I hope it gave you some valuable tools to rethink how we measure success.